Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Walton. I am the branch chief for disability and affirmative employment here at DoDEA. And this is our RA Training 101 for employees. We're very excited that all of you decided to spend your lunchtime with us today. So I'm just going to jump right in. This presentation is all about your role in the process as an employee. If you'd like to take a deep dive into how the process is outlined, it's all in our reasonable accommodation administrative instruction 1441-01. Uh, and the verbiage here is taken directly from the RAI, as we lovingly call it. So your role as the employee uh, is to make the request, right? So you're either going to make the request to your, uh, in most cases, it's going to be your first line supervisor. In the case of at the school level, it's usually the principal. At the HQ level, it'll either be your branch chief or in some cases, the division chief, right? You're going to, after what happens once the request is submitted um, to your supervisor or to one of my disability program managers in each region is they'll provide you the paperwork to make the request. We're very excited now. We have brand new reasonable accommodation forms, and essentially the first form is all about what your request is and why you're requesting it. Uh, there's also a new section in that form related to travel accommodations. Similarly, the second form is a medical documentation form and medical release form, so that if we have to go back to your doctor, if you sign that medical release, then we won't have to circle back with you. But if we need to ask a clarification question or something like that. So once the DPM makes the determination of whether you're eligible or not, then we'll jump into the interactive process discussion, which we'll talk about uh, a little later in the presentation. And there's always time to request an extension. For example, we all know how difficult it is to get a medical provider or a mental health provider to provide some detailed information that we need in order to certify you as eligible. Our standard time frame is about 2 weeks. We generally extend it for 2 additional weeks. I saw that Stephanie asked a question about new forms. They just were published at the end of last week. So the thing is not to worry if you're already in the process. You don't need to go back and complete the new form. It's a big deal to have official DoDEA forms. That is a process that I wouldn't wish on anyone. But now we have it. Now we're super excited. So Dion, if we can go to the next slide, please. All right, what are we going to do today? What are our objectives? We're going to define what a reasonable accommodation is and is not. We're going to run through the basic process, both at the HQ level and at the school level. We're going to talk about the DPM's role, the principal's role at the school level, or in the HQ level, that would be possibly your branch chief's role, whoever your first line supervisor is. In most cases, we're going to, after the interactive process, which we'll talk about in a minute, the DPM will assist the person who we call the approval authority, who essentially is the first line supervisor, in developing a response to your request. In most cases, you're not going to get exactly what you asked for. I've only seen that one time in almost 3 years here in my position at DoDEA. In most cases, what you're going to get is what we call modified approval, where you may get part of what you asked for specifically, but you're likely also to get some alternative accommodations that are designed to meet your accommodation need, but may not be specifically what you asked for. And that's management's prerogative to do that. So in most cases, you're really not even going to be dealing with the denial authority. The denial authority really comes into play when there are no more accommodations that can be offered, right? We've tried everything, and it's not worked, or there's nothing that we can do. Your disability is so severe that you can't work. That would be an example of something like that. So let's move on to the next slide, Dion. All right. This is our definition of reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation is any modification or adjustment to the job, to the essential functions or the job application process. We're not going to be talking about applicants today because none of us are applicants at this point, but reasonable accommodation is also available to applicants. Once you're certified as what we call a qualified individual with a disability, which means you've provided all the paperwork to make you eligible. And in most cases, most people are going to be able to do that, to provide the paperwork for you as an individual to be eligible to be considered. It doesn't mean that you're going to, like I said, it doesn't mean you're going to be that you're going to get the exact accommodation that you asked for. It gives you that certification gives you access to the process. I just also wanted to remind everyone that we are recording this presentation so that our friends in Europe and in the PAC, and maybe even you, would be able to come back. It'll be on our RA page, which will give you a link to at the end of the presentation. And you can come back and review it, or we just want everybody in our population to be able to access the information. And our teachers are teaching right now in the Americas. In Europe, they're enjoying their night, and in the PAC, they're in the middle of their night. So that's why that's important. But let me get back to the other parts of reasonable accommodation. So one of the key parts in, not counting being able to perform your job or with the application process, is something that we refer to as the benefits of employment. And benefits of employment are like training. For example, I'm dealing with a request recently where someone asked if they could attend the training virtually because they have a mobility issue which makes it difficult for them to walk across the campus, right? So in cases like that, that's a benefit of employment. One big benefit of employment here at DoDEA is the ability to travel and work overseas, right? So if that can be regarded as a benefit of employment. For example, if we have someone with a hearing impairment and we're trying to send them overseas, we want to make sure that we offer them that opportunity if they've qualified for the job in other ways. So let's move to the next slide. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about what a reasonable accommodation is and what a reasonable accommodation is not. A reasonable accommodation is not a favor or a complaint. It is written into the law, the first reasonable accommodation law is the Rehab Act of 1973, and that was followed up by a couple other laws. The most recent is the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendments Act of 2008 that was issued and went into effect in 2009, which basically broadened the definition of disability, which is why I said earlier, it's going to be really easy for most people to qualify to be eligible to be considered. The only wrinkle on that is it has to be a condition that you yourself have, right? Reasonable accommodations are for uh, uh, issues or for injuries or disabilities that people come to work with, not that they incur while they're at work. That's workers' comp, right? And it has to be an accommodate a request for a condition that you have. For example, caring for your aging parent um, is not an accommodation because the disability is not with a person who's requesting it, right? It's with the person. They're providing care for basically a dependent, so that doesn't qualify as a reasonable accommodation in our definition. Okay, let's move to the next slide, Dion. All right, this is our sort of our easy breakdown process flow. You as the employee are going to submit the request either to your supervisor or your region DPM. Very soon, probably by mid-November, we're going to have the capacity on our web page, or the functionality, I guess is a better word, to allow employees and applicants to request to initiate the first part of the reasonable accommodation process online and then go directly into our system. Is everybody okay? I think I heard something. So that's a big systematic improvement. We are testing that now. And like I said, hopefully we'll have that by the middle of November. So even when that functionality becomes live, though, I would encourage you to follow up with your region disability program manager or with myself, and all of our contact information is listed on our webpage, which is we'll have that on the last page of the slides here. All right, so you're going to make your request. You're going to engage with the DPM. You're going to provide the medical information that the DPM is asking for. You're going to complete the medical request form and the medical release form, right? It's important for you to realize. So these are the components of making you eligible to be considered. We'll talk about the interactive process, and we'll talk about your appeal rights in a bit. Okay, Dion, let's move to the next slide. All right. The interactive process. The interactive process is actually written into the law as an employee. That is your time to, it's a meeting between you and what we call in the RAI, the approval authority. And that, remember, in most cases, either at the school level or in the HQ level, is going to be your first line supervisor, either your principal. If you're in HQ, it'll be your division, it'll be your branch chief. In some cases, if you're at the fifth level, it may be your division chief. It just depends. The disability program manager in your region will determine who the appropriate authority is to help them process and respond to your request. That's not something that you're going to have to determine. That's something that my team does as part of their process. But your role is basically to do all the things that you need to do to be certified as eligible to be considered so that we can have this interactive process meeting, which is your goal in the interactive process meeting is going to be to tell your first line supervisor, approval authority, branch chief, principal, division chief, whoever it is, what you're requesting verbally, why you're requesting it. You're not required to discuss anything having to do with your actual diagnosis. In fact, we don't want you to do that. What your supervisor or the approval authority is may ask you about is specifically how your disability limits your ability to perform the essential functions of your job. That's what the interactive process is about from their perspective. But getting back to you, what we're going to need from you is what are your ideas in terms of what appropriate accommodations for to accommodate your disability might be, and how you think that's going to work in practice, right? How is it going to work in the real world? How is it going to work in the school? How is it going to work when you're working with the rest of your team if you're an HQ employee, right? So that's really critical. So again, that's your opportunity to submit ideas for what kinds of accommodations you want, and it's your supervisor's opportunity to ask questions about how your disability limitations impact your ability to perform the essential functions of your job. So let's move to the next slide, please. Okay, as I said earlier, the essential functions, I'm not going to read all this stuff to you, but the thing to remember about what essential functions are, they are the functions of your position that if you take them away, it's impossible for you to perform the position. So if you're a teacher, for example, assigning work and grading papers is an essential function of your job, right? If you are a teacher and you have a difficulty speaking, then we have to figure out how we're going to assist. How are you going to be able to teach your class, right? Is there, for example, an alternative communication device that you might be able to use, right? So what reasonable accommodation is, it's really taking away some of the things that we would consider marginal functions or modifying them to allow you to perform the essential functions of your job. So if you're a teacher, it may be bus duty, okay? Maybe bus duty is not essential to being a teacher, right? So what's going to happen during that interactive process meeting is your first line supervisor is going to review your essential functions with you and how you're going to be able to accomplish those essential functions with the accommodation that you are proposing in place. Okay, and again, we have the reference to our reasonable accommodation administrative instruction, which is also, you can download that from our webpage as well. All right, let's move to the next slide. All right, I'm famous for doing this with presentations. I've jumped the gun in terms of examples. So we already talked a little bit about what essential duties are. And in this case, it's lunchroom duty. Lunchroom duty in itself may not be an essential function of a teacher's job, but behavioral management is an essential function of the teacher's job in terms of the students, which is why teachers have to be physically present in order to accomplish that essential function. Okay, let's move to the next slide, please. Okay, a lot of people think, and I haven't seen this as much recently as I saw it when I first got here about 2.5 years ago. We're talking about what the agency is not required to do. You never, ever, ever, and anybody who ever has worked with me as a manager or a requester can tell you that I say this: you never remove essential functions of the positions. The essential functions of the position are unchangeable, right? All you're going to be able to do is modify the marginal functions of the job in order to allow the requester, employee, applicant, you, to accomplish the functions of their job. Because if you change the essential functions of a job, which I have seen done in my career, that always comes back to bite both the agency and the employee. Because when you take away someone's essential function, what you're essentially doing is you're creating a new job for them, right? Not on paper, but in actuality, that's what you're doing. So we never want to be in that situation either way. If a person can't perform the essential functions of their job, we want to look at the possibility of offering them access to the reassignment process, which is always the accommodation of last resort, right? That means that we have to have tried everything else first, right? For example, if you're a teacher in a brick and mortar school, we have to have tried to do everything we can to allow you to stay in your current position and accomplish those essential functions. If we can't, it's likely that you would be offered access to the reassignment process, which starts, at your school and then moves to your region. And then if there's nothing in your region, then we move from whatever region you're in. Let's say you're in the PAC or in Europe, we would move to look for a position for you in the Americas if one was available. So we never change performance standards, right? Because again, the law says you have to be able to perform the essential functions of your job with the accommodation in place. It doesn't change the impact. It doesn't change anything with regard to performance or conduct. So that's important to understand. Let's go to the next slide, please. All right, now we're back into the RA roles. The disability program manager, that person works with you as the employee and with your supervisor to try to ensure that we're providing an effective accommodation to address your disability need. Like I said, in some cases, in rare cases, it's not possible to do that, but our goal is always to do that. So the disability program manager is going to review your medical information and your request form and determine whether you're eligible. Then they're going to meet with you before the interactive process to go over what you're going to ask for and the kinds of things that you could ask for. They're also going to meet with your supervisor and give them a little bit of pre-meeting feedback in terms of ideas, in terms of what they may be able to offer you, right? Then after that pre-meeting, what's going to happen is that's when you're going to have that interactive process discussion. Okay, the interactive process discussion is the opportunity for you to speak, for your approval authority, whoever that is, to ask any pertinent questions about your limitations you are not going to get a written response by the end of that interactive process meeting in 99.9% of the cases, right? Our goal always is to get to have a written response to you, which will be issued on behalf of your approval authority by the disability program manager, right? So you'll get that. And so now let's talk about reconsideration a little bit. So if you're not satisfied with the accommodations that have been provided to you, okay, let me make it clear, you don't have to agree with them, right? That is a management prerogative to offer them. It is a misnomer to say that the employee or requester has to agree to the accommodations that are offered. Okay, if you don't agree, and you don't agree strongly enough, there is an option for reconsideration, right? And if you want to apply for reconsideration, you have 5 calendar days from the date on that memo that you received, right? And you're going to submit something in writing to your regional disability program manager that's going to tell them why you're requesting reconsideration. And then what they will do is they will take it back to the approval authority. Whoever issued the original response is the person that is going to issue the response to reconsideration. All right. They have the option at that point to change their decision or to affirm their decision. Right. So if after you receive the reconsideration response, you are still not satisfied, you must submit another piece of written documentation. It can be in the form of an email, right? That specifically states why you feel that an alternative accommodation could be offered. And by doing that, you're requesting what we call informal appeal, right? That is a extra layer of appeal that is unique to DoDEA. And we've done that to allow managers and supervisors and my staff and general counsel another opportunity to possibly lessen the number of EEO complaints, to give you another bite at the apple. So we've talked pretty much about the approval authority. There are some things that the approval authority may not have the authority to approve, which is what we often call the purple pen, right? He or she may not have the authority to approve special software, adaptive software that is not on the approved DoDEA software list, for example. So what we would have to do in that case is they'd have to go through IT and work with IT to make sure that the software that you were requesting as adaptive tech would be acceptable and approved to be on the DoDEA network. Once they got that approval, they would indicate in the response that that they'd gotten the approval from IT and that your request could be granted. They're the ones that issue the modified approvals. If there's a case, and this is rare, where the approval authority looks at your request and they say there's just nothing that we can grant, we're going to have to do a straight denial. So if that's the case, then it would then go to if it's in the case of a school, it would go to the district superintendent. If it's in the case of HQ, it would go to your division chief. And then that's the only person, that's the only position that has the authority to issue a straight denial. Um, in cases where um, that person is the person that responds to the first request, the reconsideration uh, rights would be exactly the same. If you wanted the top level denial authority to reconsider, you would go back to your disability program manager. This is why I feel I'm unfairly denied. You put it in writing. Then the DPM would work with the uh, denial authority or the approval authority, whoever issued that first response on the reconsideration, then they get that back to you. So we already talked about the denial authority for a bit. If we're going to do a straight denial, which rarely happens, then that response would go through general counsel legal review, and they would issue the denial directly to you. But let's jump back to the reconsideration, and let's say you've done the reconsideration already, right? So you see the last part of that slide is the informal appeals officer. So in order to request informal appeal, you have to have done the reconsideration request. And the informal appeal officer, there's one for each region. For example, in HQ, it is Mr. Burcham. In the Americas and Europe and the PAC, it is the chief of staff for each region. That person can request additional information from you. If there's information that has come to light since you've made your additional request that would support your request for informal review, that's the time for you to submit it, right? The informal appeals officer will work with the DPM, and it'll be issued from the informal appeals officer, but it will come from the DPM to you through email, and the IO will be copied, and they can either affirm the decision that was originally made, they can overturn it and issue a new decision, or they could do some kind of partial decision. So basically, that is, and I think probably out of the, we have had one that has been overturned in the past year. So it is worth submitting that informal appeal request if you feel strongly about it. And then, one thing that we didn't mention is you always have the right to, you always have your EEO rights. And they are enumerated on the back of the memo, along with the reconsideration rights and the informal appeal right. So our process for additional internal appeals does not have an effect on the total timeline for the EEO process, should you choose to go that route. So we are at the end of the road. This has the reasonable accommodation link for our DoDEA webpage, where you can find our new forms, our RA administrative instruction. These are some additional resources. A staff member from Jan will be with us next Thursday at noon to talk about the services, and they're basically consulting services. They're going to be able to tell you what types of accommodations have worked for people with similar disabilities to yours. And then you could take that information to the DPM and discuss it in your pre-meeting that you're going to have with them, and then discuss it and then add that to your request, your reasonable accommodation request. The other thing that I didn't mention was that you can always modify your reasonable accommodation request. Like if you've submitted your paperwork and you have got you're getting ready to walk into the interactive process meeting and you have an epiphany about um, a new accommodation that you'd like to explore, we can do that in the interactive process meeting. So you're not limited. There are a couple of cases or instances when the reasonable accommodation would either have to be reviewed or changed, right? One of the responsibilities in the employee responsibilities section talks about if you're transferred or you apply and receive or hired for another DoDEA position, that resets your accommodation because the supervisor of that position is now the approval authority in your new reasonable accommodation. And it may be that the reasonable accommodations that you had in your previous job will not be workable in your new job. So that has to be reevaluated and new accommodations would have to be established. Okay. If you get a new supervisor in your current job, right? So you haven't changed, but the supervisor has changed. That's also one where the accommodations could be changed. But in most cases, if the accommodation is working, it's probably not going to be changed, right? There's a provision in the RAI that says they have to be reviewed every year, but the review could be between you and your supervisor. It's working, and we're going to leave it in place until further notice, right? We don't want to take away things that are working. um, so that's important. But if your condition changes, that's the third kind of reason that it might require changing your accommodation. If you need more accommodation assistance and your current accommodation is no longer effective, then we're going to have to look into that. Similarly, if if you've got a temporary accommodation and you had, let's say, uh, a torn ligament in your leg and you've had surgery and that's now healed, you may get to the point where you no longer need an accommodation. Let me talk a little bit about the CAP program, Computer Accommodations Program. Because we are on continuing resolution right now, CAP doesn't have money to fund uh, assistive devices and technology, but the best thing for you to do if you're interested in uh, obtaining technology from the CAP program is let your reasonable accommodation program manager know, disability program manager, so that we can wrap that into your accommodation request. Because if it's a situation where CAP doesn't have money, we're our it's DoDEA's obligation to provide accommodations for you. It's not CAP's accommodation. CAP is just a tool, right? So we want to make sure that you get the accommodations that you need, if we can do it. All right, so we have reached the end of the rainbow. If you have questions about your specific case, if you have a specific case, to either reach out to your Region Disability Program Manager or to me. Thank you for taking the time today.